Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to continue my response to the budget. I had the pleasure of rising on last Thursday late afternoon and let up early because of time, so I'm pleased to continue today.
See, let up early because of time.
I spoke Friday.
I wasn't paying attention on Thursday.
Where I was, talked about the world context that we find ourselves in, where there are some significant economic problems all around the world. I highlighted BC's very strong financial position as illustrated or demonstrated by our debt to GDP, which is about 18%. And when we compare that to where Canada is at roughly double that, where the States are at roughly double Canada, up at 72%, and of course with the worst of all stories, at least those that have surfaced today, Greece up at 150. I spoke briefly about our Finance Committee tour and the listening exercise we went through in the fall of 2011 that served as feedback to the Finance Minister in preparation for his budget. And I talked briefly about the local context, where we have a population that is basically feeling taxes are as high as they like them. They don't want to pay more taxes. We have demand for services that are increasing.
We have a $320 million payment that we have to give to the federal government over the next 5 years to compensate for the HST transfer payment that the Liberal governments received when they brought in the HST. So, we need to factor that in. $320 million times 5 years, that's a lot of money. That's $1.6 billion.
And I talked about contrasting actions of government and those actions that the opposition put forward, because I think it's always good.
And that doesn't factor in the cost of still paying for the Winter Olympic Games in 2010, right?
So I think I left off with a confirmation that the Budget 2012 reconfirms our government's commitment to balance the budget by 13-14, and I spoke to the confidence that gives investors and job
if I remember
creators
correctly,
in this province.
BC government tried to balance the book every time they came in with their budget. So if they're trying to balance it before 2014 or at 2014, that tells me that they haven't balanced the budget. So they kind of broke their own rule.
Budgets of a typical British Columbian family, and that is.
But that's standard practice, because when they break the rules, that's okay, because they'll just make new rules to compensate for the broken rule, and then they'll change the rules that you've got so that you don't know, where you're going in life.
Pick up again is in offering some contrasts between different things that this government has done to get us where we are in a rather stable financial position, a safe harbor for investors when compared to other economies in the world. And so
okay, so that's politics.
The first thing that I'll talk about is budget.
That's where they invite all these, China and all these other countries to come in here and do what they want, right? So us poor people get pushed off to the curb. And we fight with landlords and tenancy act branch and crappy landlords and crappy corporations that, try and dub themselves as a landlord and,
I find that gets me a little upset when you look at history, because we talk about budget targets and we look at what this government has done. We've met 9 out of 10 targets. Nobody's happy that we missed the one, but when we put that in the context of the rest of the world, I don't know if there was a jurisdiction almost anywhere on the planet.
I think we need to be focusing on BC and the people of BC.
Because of the worldwide financial turmoil caused by what's happening in the States, in Greece, in France, and many other jurisdictions around the world. So what did the NDP opposition do when they were in power for 10 years in the 90s? They hit 2 out of 10. So they missed 8, hit 2, we hit 9. So I'm want to highlight to British Columbia taxpayers the record of this government as compared to the NDP opposition. When we look at debt management...
But a lot of taxpayers are starting to refuse to pay their taxes. I know of several people that just don't pay their taxes anymore. And I say, like, well, why aren't you paying your taxes? Why aren't you doing your, your tax form? Oh, well, times are tough and I can't afford it and I need a break and it's a headache and so that, the clock is ticking. So, I don't know what's going to happen for those people that just are not paying their taxes and, it's multiplying year after year after year. Take this with a grain of salt. A lot of taxpayers are just falling off the grid.
And look at the bond rating agencies that are independent, arm's length, non-emotional viewers of the province's record. And so I've done some research and looked at the history of the province's credit rating dating back to the 90s. And in the 90s, we find the language replete with stuff like, in May of 93, CBRS, which is the Canadian Bond Rating Service, changes outlook from stable to negative. That was in May of 93. April of 95, Moody's downgrades British Columbia's foreign currency rating. November of 96, CBRS revises BC's outlook rating from AA negative, or to AA negative from AA stable. May 1997, S&P downgrades rating. April 98, CBRS downgrades BC's rating. May 1998, DBRS revises the outlook from stable to negative. September 98, CBRS revises to a negative from stable. January 1999, S&P revises to negative from stable. So the story is pretty clear, Madam Speaker. So I start looking at what happened in the decade of this government, and I find dramatically different language, Madam Speaker. November 2004, S&P upgrades British Columbia. March 2005, DBRS upgrades British Columbia. March 2005, Moody's upgrades.
Children have gotten deeper into poverty. Poor families have gotten deeper into poverty. Refugees are being kicked off to the curb and becoming the next generation of, the prison industrial complex because the kids are falling through the cracks and the parents are just not educated to hold them through. A lot of elderly people are falling through the cracks that don't have the pension plans to put them into the care facilities that they need to go into. So, these are important things to remember as he's coughing out his numbers. We need to cough out the number that 25% of children in British Columbia, and this doesn't include Native children. This is just the overall of, average children, right, in our communities are living, at or below poverty level.
Hospitals and schools.
In 1999, I think it was 19%. So that's about a 6% increase in the last 10 years, and that's an old statistic. So we don't know if that statistic has increased.
About $3 million annually. So over the normal 10-year life of government financing, that
cost of food has gone up. Tuna in itself, in the last 2 months, a can of tuna is $1.69 on sale, where prior to that, they were 89.99 cents if you were lucky to find them at that price on sale. Now they're $1.70 on sale over the last 2 months, and that's not including everything else that you have to shop for, right?
So go to some other issues and try and contrast some differences. The one I have was just recently on the floor of this House, beginning of this week, the member from Chilliwack brought forward a motion to support the net zero initiative the government is asking unions within the province.
Now, mind you, I'm not a politician, so I don't understand everything that's coming in front of me with these debates, right?
Difficulties and the negotiations that are happening.
Some of this stuff is pretty straightforward.
And the BCTF, I thought that is probably one of the more pressing issues facing government today, and we brought that onto the floor.
Now this I can get with because I've looked at
the opposition.
there's Surrey school district or Surrey, municipality budget for, I can't remember, 2002, 2003 as a district. And when it dealt with schools, $320 million went for incomes, pensions, that type of thing, where $22 million went for capital maintenance. So that's a huge gap. So unions do have to take some responsibility for that.
Our own government's costing of that.
Because what happens is when these people get old and they get their pension plans, the institutional racism that was, that built this type of a system where some have and other ones don't, by the time these people get old and start collecting their pension plans, they go out in the street and they see the homeless and they see the poor and, they see the drug addicted, and they sit there and they convince themselves that, those people deserve what they get because they didn't work and didn't earn what these pensioners, in 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years from now are going to get once, they retire from, working as teachers and administrators and politicians and, anyone that works for the government and gets a good pension plan. I mean, they know at whatever age they're working, within the system, whether they're 20 or whether they're 50, they know that, their future is set because it's a government pension plan on top of, whatever else comes in that they accumulate over a course of years, right? But, for me, the way I've determined it is, it just creates, it just builds in institutional racism deeper into the system, because by the time these people get old, the entitlement mentality kicks in, and they convince themselves that, they earned what they have, and everybody else gets kicked to the curb, and, it's fuckery, really, because if you're spending $320 million for pensions and wages, and, superannuations and buyout packages and all this other stuff, and only $22 million for capital maintenance in terms of, fixing a window in a school or repairing a door or a leaky pipe or whatever it is. And the kids aren't getting what they need in terms of, a more flexible, educational environment so that, kids can learn at their own pace without the pressure of, jumping through a million hoops just so the teacher can justify their paycheck. We've got problems, right? But that's the system, and we have that today. I see people today, with their pensions sitting high on the horse, not thinking that they're part of the problem, when in fact, if take away the pension, and where would we find them? We'd find them up by the front room, sitting in a wheelchair, waiting for a handout. So before we cast stones, we really need to look at all angles of the problem.
And at that point, they start working for themselves. So it got me wondering if June the 6th, 2011 is the current Tax Freedom Day, what did it look like back in 99? And I went back and had a look, and the Tax Freedom Day in 1999, after 10 years of
prior to this, last week, they were talking about 50% of the budget goes to the union paycheck, whether it's a pension plan, buyout package, or whatever it is, 50% of the Liberal government goes into union wages. So that's something to think about.
I'm running out of time, so I would really leave